Yesterday, my wife and I met a con man in Manila. The remarkable thing wasn't that he asked for money, it was how long it took me to realize that is what he was doing. So, as I was saying, yesterday my wife and I had quite an unexpected encounter in Manila. At about 3 p.m. In the afternoon, we were in a coffee shop in Ermita in Robinson's Mall on the first floor. And as we were leaving, an American guy, quite softly spoken, with a veteran's hat on, looking slightly disheveled, said in quite a softly spoken voice, "Sir, do you have access to a Philippines phone?" At that point, nothing seemed particularly suspicious. Obviously, your natural instinct, especially for me who's worked in the Middle East, I've got American friends, I've worked with Americans, I've given support to American situations, shall we say, and my natural instinct is to help. So at that point there was nothing suspicious particularly. He went on to say, if I can send a text to my friend who's supposed to meet me here, that will help me a lot, because, and here starts the story, building the story in our heads primarily, I've been robbed by, I think he said, to Bombay, meaning, which is quite a local term for Indian guys. I've been robbed by 2 Indian guys on a bike. I've been robbed of my wallet, my phone, and my laptop. So he actually still had a big rucksack on his back, but for me, in retrospect, I kind of realised that was a bit weird because he seemed to have everything on his back. He said, if I could just send a text to my friend, Rob, this is Leo, please pick up the phone, then he knows it's from me. There's no reply, of course, because it's a bogus number. In fact, it transpires it was probably his own number in his pocket. So I went through this whole rigmarole, sent a text on his behalf, of course no reply, no answer. Then I tried to call it. It wasn't a dead number, but it just rang and rang, so that was there. So there in the story, in our heads, that was that door closed off to him. So at this point he said, as if to justify it, oh, he's an alcoholic, maybe he's passed out, oh God, what am I going to do now, blah, 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 blah. My wife then said to him, sort of the obvious thing, why don't you go to the police? So he kind of, he didn't balk at that, but he was quite evasive. And he said, oh, there's no point in me doing that. I live in Cebu. I just want to get home now. He appeared traumatized from what had allegedly happened. And I just want to get back now. I just want to get back to where I live in Cebu. And I just want to have done with it, was his sort of attitude, There was no histrionics, there was no drama. He remained softly spoken, but he was slowly building this picture of what we might call impossibility. Impossibility for his situation. In terms of appearance, he had what appeared to be, and I suspect they weren't real now, lesions and cuts and grazes on his legs. He was wearing these knee-length shorts, and these grazes, and 1 or 2 looked like sort of gouges, but on reflection they may have been just a simple trick, some makeup. And he didn't mention it, but very cleverly it sort of fed into the story, because obviously we've got our eyes and we've got our ears, and he's working on both at this point. So there we are, the story's forming in our heads. No wallet, no phone, no laptop, no way of contacting help, no support network, and a need to get to Cebu. What struck me most, again, was his calm manner and his sort of almost methodical working of, his marks, us. He almost perceivably lowered his voice at this point and said, I need to get back to Cebu tonight. And he put this in voluntarily, I didn't ask how much, and that is 3,000 pesos for the ferry. So at this point, because I'd had a similar encounter, which they didn't get anything from me, in Bahrain, actually, of all places, in the Middle East. The alarm bell started ringing at this point, the mention of money. The mention of money to an English guy is going to ring a bell, and that rang a bell. At that point I realised the whole thing was a scam, and at this point some people perhaps will be taken in and dip into their wallet and give him money. So yeah, that was that. So at that point, I just signalled to my wife, visually, let's get out of here. So we did, and we just sort of left him standing there. What I didn't particularly like was the fact that he was wearing a veteran's hat. It was a US Navy veteran's hat. And, we're all inclined to help people. We see people like that, we see them as, sympathetically. And I really didn't like that. My wife seemed to think that he had some kind of neckerchief on as well. She said it was like a Scout's neckerchief. So I didn't spot this at the time. And I've tried, by the way, on the thumbnail, and I'll just put a picture up now, to render a reasonable impression of him. The wife thought she thought it was a photo of him actually. But I tried to render a picture of him with AI. And I think it's pretty accurate. So if you see him, and of course I'm full of hindsight. After the fact, should have taken a photo, should have maybe called security, should have maybe called the cops, didn't. So I'm absolutely full of all this, should have done this, should have done that now. But that's how we are as human beings. We don't always react in the right way, unless you're very experienced in those sort of situations. Maybe you're a member of the security forces, or you're ex-police or something like that. You'd be a little bit more switched on to what you would do in that sort of circumstance. And the final thing was that after we left, I was a little bit in kind of like shock mode, and I couldn't believe what had happened, and I was sort of disgusted that it was another foreigner that did it. So we sort of walked back and we walked forth outside of the coffee shop, and then we sort of gathered our senses, and then we went to go back down to the mall, to the supermarket. We needed to go to the supermarket. As we came back, he already, outside of the coffee shop, in front of it, engaged a young American guy who I presume was his Filipino girlfriend in a conversation, and he was starting to play his game, get them in his game as well. I beckoned the guy over, the young American guy. The young American guy came over and said, what? I said, do you know this guy? He said, no, I don't know him. He's just somebody who needs a little bit of help. All I said was, this will end in a request for money. So I left that with him. I didn't interfere anymore. I didn't make a scene. I didn't say to the guy, oh, leave now, blah, blah, blah. I'm telling you. None of that. I just left it with him. He looked like a sensible guy. I'm sure he put an end to it, and he went as well. So my only addendum to all of this would be that I've been here 4 months. I have encountered many, many situations with Filipinos, and I find them welcoming, friendly, hospitable, for the most part very, very civilized and kind. And I suppose I can count on one hand the encounters I've had with people who are either unpleasant, aggressive, rude, or just generally obnoxious. And I'm sorry to say that all of those people have been foreigners. So, that's my experience so far. That may change. Obviously, if I get out into the province, there may be some other experiences that I'm going to have. But for now, that's my experience so far. So has anybody experienced a similar thing from some sort of badly intended foreigner here, rudeness from foreigners? I think this Con Man foreigner, I think he was an exception, but he's quite practiced, and I imagine he's probably quite famous amongst the little niche community of expats, because he will only go, obviously, for the English-speaking expats who he feels maybe have a couple of quid in their pocket, a few dollars. So yeah, let me know. I'd be intrigued to know. Let me know what you think. Would you have gone so far into the conversation like me before you kind of figured out what was going on? Would you have cut and run quicker? Was I stupid for staying so long and listening to his story? Or, like me, because you're not expecting it, and he's very clever with his narrative, would you even have put your hand in your wallet and given him some money? Or would you have been really wise and be honest with yourself and with me if you want to comment? Would you have actually made any sort of cut and run before me? Or would you have cut and run more or less around the same time when the mention of money came up? So let me know. I'd love to hear from you. This is Cano Life signing out. Please subscribe. Speak soon. Ciao.